Yeah. I never, this just appeared on my desk.
No, this is yours. Raise the age. Raise the age.
Will the Senate please come to order? This afternoon, our devotional exercises will be conducted by the Rabbi Toby Weissman, Director of Jewish Community in Vermont. Thank you, of Vermont.
Good afternoon. Jewish tradition teaches that within each one of us resides a divine, infinite light, more spiritually powerful than the sun. And this awesome light is given to each of us when we are born and stays with us even after we leave the world. When we are born, we are connected strongly to this light, the light of our souls. However, as we grow older, we forget that we are beings of divine light. What can we do to become reconnected to this divine light, this inner light that we all have? Well, the Jewish tradition teaches us that we can find our way back to shining our infinite light. And we do this in a little bit more than 2 weeks. We celebrate the Jewish holiday of Passover, where we celebrate the birth of the Jewish people, from slavery to freedom. Some of you might have been to a Passover Seder, the special meal that is held, where we tell the story of Passover with the help of an ancient text called the Haggadah, which means to tell our story. The central message of the Haggadah states, in every generation, a person must see themselves as if they themselves came out of slavery from Egypt. Why are we encouraged to see ourselves as slaves? Aren't we free people now? We don't live in Egypt under the rule of Pharaoh. So how does this ancient ritual speak to us today? Rabbi Aaron Moss says, we are certainly slaves. We are slaves to our own inhibitions, fears, habits, cynicism, and prejudices that prevent us from expressing our true inner self, from reaching our spiritual potential. Our souls are incarcerated in selfishness, laziness, and indifference. Rabbi Moss suggests that the Hebrew word for Egypt, Mitzrayim, means limitations, and Pharaoh represents our egos. So instead of reading, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, we read, we are today slaves to our own egos, stuck in our limitations. So how do we free ourselves from our inner Pharaoh, our own egos, and find a way out of our limitations? Well, for Jews, in the next 2 weeks, we'll be cleaning countless hours, preparing for this spiritual liberation by cleaning our homes of something called chametz, or chametz, which is translated into 5 different grains that are leavened. While doing this intensive physical cleaning, we will focus on spiritually cleaning out that which has embittered and enslaved us, preventing us from being closer to the light of our souls and the light of our loved ones and the light of those in our communities who need our help. Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach teaches that when we get rid of our outer chametz, we are more able to hear the voices and the cries of others and the cries of our own souls. May we have the courage to face those places in ourselves where we are stuck, clear out that which has become embittered within us and entrenched, and move forward towards a fuller life, freed of our own internal limitations and constraints. May we do this so that we are able to receive the completely new divine light that is flowing into us so that we can listen and respond to our own inner voice, to the voice of our loved ones, and to the many vulnerable voices in our communities. Thank you.
Are there any announcements? Seeing none, we have House bills for referral. We have H398, an act related to Vermont Economic Development Authority, and it passed the House on March 20th, 2025. Please listen to the first reading.
H398, an act relating to the Vermont Economic Development Authority.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill, and it is referred to the Committee on Finance. H461, an act relating to expanding employee access to unpaid leave, passing the House March 20th, 2025. Please listen to the first reading.
H461, an act relating to expanding employee access to unpaid leave.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill, and it is referred to the Committee on Economic Development. H480, an act related to miscellaneous amendments to education law, passed the House on March 21st, 2025. Please listen to the first reading.
H480, an act relating to miscellaneous amendments to education law.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill, and it is referred to the Committee on Education. Orders of the day. We will be moving to S18 for third reading. S18, an act related to licensure of freestanding birth centers. Please listen to the third reading.
S18, an act relating to licensure of freestanding birth centers.
Are there, wait a minute, I was supposed to ask if there were any amendments before third reading. Seeing none, the question now is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we have passed S18. We now have S122, an act relating to economic and workforce development. Are there any amendments before third reading? Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do have an amendment before third reading, which is being passed out. I met this morning with my friends down the hall at the Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. And in the spirit of making a bill that I'm not a big fan of, a little bit better, I presented them with this amendment. And it does make a few changes. You will see, I will try to speak slowly as you get it. The first, second, and third instances of amendment are related to the Vermont Arts Council Film and Creative Media Industry Initiative. As I mentioned yesterday on the floor, I have some personal experience with film and media in Vermont. And so I offered this amendment that would essentially expand the definitions that were presented in the bill. And I realized that the funding and the position were removed by our Appropriations Committee, but if they are to be put back in, this would create an expanded definition that really includes the Vermont film and creative media community and industry, including academic, educational, creative, commercial, and exhibition resources in Vermont, it's highly unlikely that we're ever going to get to the point where we're going to have major commercial Hollywood films filmed here, as much as a lot of people love to make films about Vermont. We just don't have the infrastructure and resources, and no matter how many half-time positions we put toward it, there's just not going to happen in Vermont. But what we do have in Vermont is a really vibrant, creative film and media community that is working on short films, documentaries, video essays, et cetera, and doing so throughout Vermont, but also centered on our academic institutions. So this language on the first 3 sections is really meant to expand the definition of those resources and help the current community of film and media makers that we have in Vermont. And I thank the senator from Rutland who helped get the language just right and make sure I had the correct words for that. So thank you, Senator. The fourth and fifth instances of amendment are related to the Vermont-Ireland Trade Commission. As you all know, I've been a vocal sort of opponent of this. I think it sort of puts the cart before the horse. But I did present in this amendment reducing the number of people on that commission. It was a 10-person commission, which seems really big to me. So reducing it so that it would be 7 members. So 2 members appointed by the governor, 2 by the speaker, and 2 by the committee on committees, and that no more than 2 members of the commission could be legislators. I think for optics purposes, it's really important that it not be just a legislative committee about trade with Ireland. And then at the senior senator from Chittenden Southeast mentioned the Commission on International Trade, which is an existing commission. It exists in statute, but it's kind of not functioning right now. It hasn't met for a number of years, at least 5 or 6, perhaps more years. And so this amendment would sort of refresh that commission, hopefully get new members appointed to it, and expand its scope from it's currently a commission that just looks at trade agreements between the federal government and foreign countries and how that impacts Vermont. And this would expand it to be that plus between Vermont and a foreign country. So if the Ireland thing goes forward, that would be under this sort of scope of what this commission might look at. And I also wanted to note the bottom of page 3 on the amendment, you'll note that there is language that's in current law that this commission is a mechanism for citizens and legislators to voice their concerns, which shall be used to make policy recommendations to the General Assembly, to the governor, and to Vermont's congressional delegation, or to the trade representatives of the United States government. Recommendations shall be designed to protect Vermont's jobs and business environment, state sovereignty from any negative impacts of trade agreements. It seems to me that this is extremely relevant right now, so it might be a really good time to re-up this. And then on the final thing that it would amend is that it would give this commission shall be consulted when a trade commission is proposed to be established by the General Assembly and shall provide a recommendation as to whether that trade commission shall be established. So if there's another trade thing proposed like the Ireland one, this commission would be consulted and they would give their recommendation. So that is the amendment, and I thank the members of the committee, and I thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Senate Economic Development Committee heard this amendment, and we are grateful to the senator from Addison for bringing it to us. I think this helps and is additive, and we are very grateful. I had the occasion over lunch to be speaking with my counterpart in the House, and they are very keen on looking and reviving this Commission on International Trade. The chair there had served, when he was vice chair of that committee, you'll all remember Representative Kathy Keenan had served on it. That was the last time it seems to have been active. So it's time for this to be revived, and I think it's important. I also think as we looked at sister states, that work also could be incorporated into this. And so we think on the whole, these are excellent additions to our already excellent bill. And we encourage you to support it as we did 5-0.
Senator from Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I might ask a question of the presenter of the amendment.
The presenter of the amendment is interrogated.
I thank the senator for the work on this. I'm wondering, in the amendment, it says in the final instance on page 4, proposed subsection 5, the commission shall be consulted when a trade commission pursuant to this chapter is proposed to be established and shall provide a recommendation. Would this be after the establishment of the trade commission? In other words, would the trade commission with Ireland go forward now? And then from this point on, a proposal would need to go through this commission, or would the Ireland trade proposal need to go through this commission?
I think because these would become law at the same time, the Ireland Commission would go forward. It would just be future ones, so that there would be a process for vetting future trade commission proposals. But the Ireland one would become law at the same time as this, so.
Thank you, and I see the nod from the Chair of Economic Development. I thank the senator.
Are you ready for the question? The question is, shall S 122 be amended as offered by the senator from Addison? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we have amended S 122. Are there any further amendments before third reading? Seeing none, please listen to the third reading.
S 122, an act relating to economic and workforce development.
The question now is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we have passed S 122. We now have S 123, an act relating to miscellaneous changes to laws related to motor vehicles. Are there any amendments to be offered before third reading? Senator from Lamoille.
I have an amendment offered on behalf of the Transportation Committee. Mr. President, I could characterize most of this as some cleanup and some very minor changes. And there are a number of sections to this, and I'll just quickly run through them. In the first instance, a member of our committee was approached by the member from Wyndham was approached by the head of the Sheriff's Association. In section 6, we exempt EVs from the infrastructure fee for state, municipal, volunteer, fire, and rescue organizations. This would add vehicles county, which is mostly sheriffs. So if a sheriff department at the county level got an EV, they would be added in the same as everybody else. In section 2, it strikes the word motor vehicle and inserts the words purchase and use. In the third section, it strikes the word used. In the fourth, it strikes used and adds purchase and use. In the fifth and sixth entrance, it strikes used. In the seventh instance, it adds the word and. The eighth instance is in section 43. We have asked DMV to come back with a report study and a report internal to DMV about the purchase and use tax and how it's assessed and how it mixes in with registration. We leave that all the same. What we do add is that we've had some instances of people from out of state coming with cars. They pay their full purchase and use tax from the state they're coming from. They come into Vermont and then they're totally assessed the purchase and use tax again. And what we do is we ask that DMV report back to us and take a look at this and see how it's addressed and how they assess the purchase and use tax in that, so we can take a look at that issue going forward in the future. And this is all just a study report that comes back. That is our total amendment, which you see on the amendment has all the members of the Transportation Committee, and we thank the body.
So the question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the senator from Lamoille and others? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we have amended S-123 as offered by the senator from Lamoille and others. Are there any further amendments? Listen to the third reading of the bill.
S-123, an act relating to miscellaneous changes to laws related to motor vehicles.
Now you've heard the third reading of the bill, and the question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we have passed S-123. We now have S-125, an act related to workers' compensation and collective bargaining rights. Are there any amendments before third reading? Senator from Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am not sure if you will find the amendment on your desks or if it's it's in the calendar. Okay, great, because I was trying
It
to
is in the calendar on
see
page
what the
546.
body language was being projected by the secretary. Okay, so on page 546, because we did ask to have it in the calendar, and I announced that yesterday, you will find a short amendment introduced on behalf of 3 members of the committee. Although the amendment does not have all the members of our committee as signatories, I think all would agree that these 2 matters are ones we gave significant and due consideration in committee. We simply weren't able to reach consensus, but there was a lot of discussion of trying to come to some progress on the spirit of both of these, and I will let other members of the committee speak for themselves if they so choose. The first of the 2 sections of the amendment has to do with the decertification of the representation of a particular union by its membership. Currently, and particularly for our state employees, this becomes relevant. There is only a 30% threshold to essentially have a binding vote of no confidence in a union. And this means that they are in some ways recalled and would then have to go through an election, possibly with representation from another union or some other combination of circumstances. This would change that threshold to 50% plus 1. The testimony we've heard speaks to the lower threshold being used as a potential weapon across the country in sowing doubt and causing chaos and disarray for our unions when you can activate 30% of their membership to advance some kind of vote of no confidence. The states that have looked at raising the decertification threshold have done so to the level of 50% plus 1. That includes Ohio, Hawaii, and Massachusetts. We have talked a lot about, not only in Proposition 3, supporting the spirit of unionizing and collective bargaining in the state, but also in terms of the workload of the Vermont Labor Relations Board. These kinds of processes add a lot of time and energy from all parties, including the adjudication of the Vermont Labor Relations Board. I think also some of our witnesses would like us to just think about if 30% of our constituents could recall us at any time and call for a vote. That would probably take up a lot of our time and energy when it is not an actual majority, a simple majority of our constituents who would be required to do that. And frankly, recall votes in general can cause a lot of chaos regardless, and we don't have that opportunity here in Vermont, is my understanding. So this would raise that decertification threshold to 50% plus one. The second amendment you have before you, I would call good government housekeeping oversight. For over 100 years, we have had payroll requirements so that people are properly classified, that we can keep track of state projects, and these in the prevailing wage section of law would be state projects where the vendor is receiving $100,000 or more to take on a state contract. This is already, certified payroll is already a requirement for federal projects, any projects that have federal dollars, mostly an agency of transportation, under Davis-Bacon wage provisions. So this would be adding the same requirement for prevailing wage jobs in the state, where we have determined that we want bids to come in on a level playing field, such that that vendor has to demonstrate that they are paying and classifying their workers according to what we believe is in the best interest of Vermonters and Vermont taxpayers. So that certified payroll is something that most of the contractors we heard from are used to doing. And I will say there was concern about a provision of this that would give this information automatically to the Attorney General's office. We struck that section out and pushed the date of implementation out to 2026 to respond to concerns or desires to make sure that we don't have a dampening effect on people seeking out state contracts. So there's time for education, and also people don't feel like there's a gotcha moment where it's already going to the state's top cop before they know if they've done anything improper or not. So other states, New York, Massachusetts, some of the states around us have this certified payroll requirement. A lot of our vendors and contractors are operating in multiple states in the Northeast and are very used to this requirement, and we felt it was time to add that here. Mr. President, our vote was 3-2 out of committee for this amendment, and I certainly, as one senator, would ask the body for their support for these good labor practices that help us strengthen our unions and our right to collectively organize.
So the question is, shall S-125 be amended as offered by the senator from Chittenden and others, as is in today's calendar on page 546? Are you ready for the question? Senator from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. President. As the reporter of the bill indicated, there was not unanimous support for this particular amendment, even though the fact is that all of the members of the committee voted for Proposition 3 and are supporters of unionization. We were particularly concerned, at least I was, I'll speak for myself, I was particularly concerned about the provisions, though, that dropped the vote or changed the vote for decertification, or potential decertification, from 50% plus one down to 30%. The proponents of the bill, I think, made a valid case, and a case that we certainly considered, and that was that a relatively small number of votes at 30% could very well be something that you use almost to harass the union, but constantly having a relatively small number of people in comparison raise the issue of decertification and cause constant recurring votes of decertification. Decertification, this percentage, by the way, is not a percentage, this higher percentage that this amendment offers is not necessarily a constant throughout the United States. There are many states that do in fact have lower thresholds. In this particular case, though, a lot of the discussion and proposals that were made in the committee was to, well, let's raise it to something like 40% or even 45%. And the majority declined to consider those those issues. Recognize that what we're talking about here is not a vote to end the union certification at all. It is simply a vote to hold the vote. It is a measure, that same measure that we use in allowing card check, in allowing people to indicate by signing a card that they wish to have an election union, a union to have an election, a vote to have an election for a union. It doesn't necessarily bring it about. And we're saying that for people who decide that, well, this may not be the right union for us, we would like to decertify this union and have another vote. Again, a vote in which the majority would decide the vote. Is it a perfectly appropriate thing to do? And we should try to balance the playing field to some extent. Even recognizing the potential that it could be used to harass, raise it sufficiently so it doesn't, but not necessarily to the majority vote status, which we think is the appropriate end result of an actual vote. This is not a vote. This is a request for a vote. And make it a majority plus one, or 51% for all intents and purposes, is not the right answer, is not an appropriate or fair answer. And that is why I certainly oppose the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Are you ready for the question? The question is, shall S-125 be amended as offered by the senator from Chittenden and others? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and we have passed the amendment. Are there any further amendments before third reading? Listen to the third reading of the bill.
S-125, an act relating to workers' compensation and collective bargaining rights.
The question is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we have passed S-125. Back to the top. Yep, back to the top. Oh, that's a big one. We now have S-71, introduced on February 16th, 2025. It was referred to the Committee on Institutions, which reports it has considered the bill and recommends that the bill be amended as it appears, starting on page 520 in today's calendar, and then when so amended, the bill ought to pass. Listen to the second reading of the bill.
S-71, an act relating to consumer data privacy and online surveillance.
I recognize the senator from Bennington District, Senator Plunkett, for the report of the Committee on Institutions.
And thank you, Mr. President. After much suspense and even more suspense this morning, I'm finally reporting this bill. And as Mr. President mentioned, the Institutions Committee recommends by a vote of 5-0-0 that S-71 be amended as detailed on page 520 of today's calendar. And what this amendment does is it strikes all of the original language from S-71 and replaces it with the language from S-93. So S-93 was a bill that was introduced and referred to the Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs Committee, and it remained there. And the reason for the delay in the reporting, I did have some questions about this, is that it made sense that that committee have a once-over of the bill before it being reported, and that was finally completed this morning. So right now, Vermont does not have a comprehensive data privacy law. And that is a law that applies generally across most industries. And I believe everyone here is at least aware that last year, a data privacy bill did pass, but then was vetoed by the governor. And so most of the, I think 25 of the people here were involved in that in some fashion. And in the governor's veto letter, the governor indicated expressly the preference that Vermont adopt Connecticut's data privacy law. And that is what this amendment proposes. So Connecticut implemented comprehensive protections in 2023. There was an initial bill that passed in 2022 that was amended somewhat. And New Hampshire followed suit this year with legislation taking effect, I think sometime this year. This bill, when amended, will include Vermont with those other states. And our recommendation is to adopt the law that mirrors Connecticut. And this amendment contains the essential consumer protections of really any data privacy law. That is the right to confirm if your personal data is being processed, the right to correct inaccuracies in your information, the right to delete your personal data, the right to obtain copies of your information in a portable format, and the right to opt out of targeted advertising, sale of personal data, and profiling. So what the bill will do is it will create a new chapter in Chapter 9, Chapter 61A. And now you can look at the bill on 520. I'll be going through it section by section, and these are the statute sections, not the sections of the bill. So section 2415, this is the definition section, and it sets forth the meanings of several important terms in the bill. For example, the term consent means a clear affirmative act signaling a consumer's freely given and unambiguous agreement to allow the processing of personal data relating to the consumer. It does not include acceptance in broad terms of use agreement or when closing a given piece of content. So this is consent that you actually know that you're giving rather than simply clicking on. I agree with all of these terms that I've not read. The term consumer is a Vermont resident. And so that's pretty broad. But it does not include individuals acting in a commercial or employment context. And what that means is that a business that this bill might apply to, their employee information, it doesn't apply. Personal data means information that is linked or reasonably linkable to an individual, but does not include de-identified data or publicly available information. And two other terms, controller and processor, which I'll be referring to, they're fairly important in this, but controller means a person, and a person is anybody or anything, any entity, so includes a company, but a controller means a person who, alone or jointly with others, determines the purpose and means of processing personal data. So that means essentially the company that decides what to do with the data is the controller. And a processor means a person who processes personal data on behalf of that controller. So moving on to section 2416, this is the applicability section. Importantly, this bill only applies to entities that in the previous calendar year processed the data of more than 100,000 Vermonters. It also applies to entities that processed more than 25,000 Vermonters, their data, and derived more than 25% of their gross revenue from the sale of personal data. That's again in the previous calendar year. This bill does not have similar limits for entities that process consumer health data, which is somewhat more protected. Section 2417 sets forth the exemptions for the bill. And these are groups of entities exempt, as well as specific information, data, and activities are exempt. So public agencies are exempt, as are most nonprofits. Protected health information under HIPAA is exempt, as is certain health data used in government research. 2418 lays out the rights consumers have in this bill. Consumers are given the ability to confirm whether a data controller is processing their data, and the ability for the consumers to access, delete, or correct inaccuracies in their personal data. Consumers can also opt out of targeted advertising or having their personal data sold. This section then lays out methods for consumers to make these requests, and for controllers handling these requests and any rights of appeal for the consumers. 2419 gives consumers right to authorize another person to act on their behalf to exercise their rights in the previous section. So you can hire another company to go through the internet and opt you out of everyone else's data. Section 2420 sets forth the duties required by data controllers. So data controllers must limit the collection of personal data to what is relevant and reasonably necessary in relation to the purposes for which the data is processed, unless the consumer gives them consent to do so otherwise. The processing of sensitive data, which includes consumers' personal characteristics, health data, that requires consumer consent. The controllers shall provide a privacy notice to consumers that contains the categories of personal data processed by the controller, the purpose for processing the personal data, and a disclosure if the controller sells the personal data to third parties. Finally, a controller must provide a means for a consumer to opt out of targeted advertising and sale of their personal data. Section 2421 contains the duties of data processors. So a data processor must adhere to the instructions of a data controller to enable the controller to meet its obligations in this bill. There must also be a contract between the processor and the controller that creates the duty owed by processors, as well as establishing duties of confidentiality between processors and controllers. 2422 requires controllers to produce data protection assessments for its activities that present a heightened risk of harm to consumers. And a heightened risk of harm includes processing personal data for targeted advertising, selling personal data, and processing sensitive data. And these assessments must be provided to the Attorney General upon request and pursuant to an investigation. Assessments made by a controller to comply with a similar law in another state may itself be sufficient if it's reasonably similar in scope. 2423 sets forth the terms for de-identified data. A controller in possession of such data must take reasonable measures that it cannot associate with an individual, associate it with another individual. Let me start that over. Must take reasonable measures to not be able to associate the de-identified data with an identifiable individual. Does not require a controller or processor to de-identify data or maintain it in order to respond to a consumer request. So that is, if a consumer asks for their data to be corrected or deleted, the controller doesn't have to figure out if their de-identified data is that person. Section 2424 provides limitations for the bill. And for example, the bill does not prevent a controller or processor from complying with state or federal law or civil or criminal investigation or a law enforcement agency's reasonable request. It also does not prevent these entities from providing a service requested by the consumer or from responding to a security incident. The bill does not restrict a controller or processor's ability to collect or use data to conduct internal research or effectuate a product recall. The section also clarifies that a controller or processor that discloses personal data to a third-party controller or processor does not violate the terms of this bill if the third party itself violates this bill, so long as the controller or processor did not have actual knowledge that the third party would violate the bill. Section 2425 provides the enforcement mechanism of the bill, and this is one of the important parts. The Attorney General is given the sole authority to enforce violations, and explicitly a private right of action is excluded. So before January 1st of 2027, the Attorney General must also provide notice to a controller that is in violation of the bill. The controller is given 60 days to cure that violation before the AG can file an enforcement action. After January 1st of 2027, the cure period becomes optional, but essentially that's how lawsuits happen anyway. There's an initial discussion before filing suit. In section 2426 sets forth the consumer health data privacy provisions. So no person shall provide an employee or contractor with consumer health data unless the employee or contractor is subject to a duty of confidentiality. nor can a person use a geofence, and that's essentially a boundary to identify if someone's there, to track individuals to a certain radius around healthcare facilities for purposes regarding their consumer health data. Certain entities are exempt from these requirements, including governments, institutions of higher learning, and certain financial institutions. So this bill, if passed, would become effective on July 1st, 2026. And the Institutions Committee either received spoken or written testimony from a large number of people. I'll start off with our Legislative Counsel, Rick Stagel, also the Attorney General, the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, a company called Check My Ads, Cernable Incorporated, former Oklahoma legislator, FINRA, Consumer Reports, the Vermont Bankers Association, VPIRG, Gazelle Consulting LLC, the ACLU, Vermont Country Store, a resident of Montpelier, Vermont Womenpreneurs, the Vermont Medical Society, Vermont Ski Areas Association, the Vermont Information Technology Leaders, Faraday, Vermont Association of Area Agencies on Aging, and Scouts Digital. And Mr. President, your Institutions Committee unanimously recommends that S71 be amended. Thank you.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Institutions? Are you ready for the question? Roll call has been requested, and when the vote is taken, it shall be taken by roll. Are you ready for the question? The bell is ringing. Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am very much looking forward to voting in favor of this bill. I think it is incredibly important. I'm glad we're taking this step. I do have a question for the reporter of the bill.
The senator from Bennington is interrogated.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am wondering about the interplay between this bill and the kids code that we also recently passed. What I guess maybe I'll leave the question broad for now. Could you just speak to how these two bills interact with each other? Yeah.
And Mr. President, I'll have to go into more detail. You might be able to give more detail on any overlap before third reading. But our expectation was that there's essentially no interaction between the two bills. I don't think there's anything in conflict. There may be some slight concurrence in data privacy, but they're intended to be separate.
Okay, great. And I may follow up with a couple of specific questions about that offline. So thank you so much. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator from Washington, for giving everyone time to make it into the chamber. Are you ready for the question? If so, the secretary will call the roll.
Senator Baru.
Yes.
Senator Beck.
Yes.
Senator Bongo.
Yes.
Senator Brennan.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Collmore.
Yes.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Douglas.
Yes.
Senator Bueller.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hart.
Yes.
Senator Hashim.
Yes.
Senator Heffernan.
Yay.
Senator Ingalls.
Yes.
Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator Major.
Yes.
Senator Matos.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
Yes.
Senator Pershling.
Yes.
Senator Plunkett.
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Bohosky. Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
Yes.
Senator Westman.
Yes.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
Yes.
Senator Bohosky.
The ayes being 29, the noes being 0, The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of S 71. Oh. Okay. I will restate what we just did. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as recommended by the Committee on Institutions. Now the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of S 71. Somebody's talking? No whispering. We now have S 126, an act related to healthcare payment and delivery system reform. Introduced by the Committee on Health and Welfare on March 18th, 2025, affecting the appropriations of the expenditures of the state. The bill was referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which recommends that the bill be amended, and when so amended, that the bill ought to pass. Listen to the second reading of the bill.
S 126, an act relating to healthcare payment and delivery system reform.
I recognize the senator from Chittenden, Senator Lyons, for the explanation of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. We face high education costs in great part because of high healthcare costs. We're confronted with high healthcare costs that challenge our.
Excuse me, Mr. President. I believe we have the wrong bill.
Okay.
Start over.
Wrong bill. Wrong bill.
Good to see the senator from Chittenden paying attention. Are we all set? Yeah. Okay, still being passed out.
It's for tomorrow.
Please.
Senator from Chittenden, you may begin again now that we have the right bill.
Thank you again, Mr. President. While you're receiving the bill, you're also going to receive some handouts and graphics that we'll go over a little bit later in my presentation of the bill as a whole. As I said earlier, we face high education costs in great part because of high healthcare costs. We're confronted with high healthcare costs that challenge our overall state economy. Your Senate Health and Welfare Committee considers the cost of healthcare as a crisis. And we bring S 126, our committee bill, to the full Senate as a fundamental step to address that crisis. Media are filled with stories of hospital costs, failing insurers, large hospital payouts to executives, and ongoing struggles many Vermonters face to make ends meet. Vermonters face choices of paying for health care, or prescription drugs, or rent, or mortgage, or food. S 126 is a continuation of our work, which we began in previous sessions, and builds on current health care planning and regulation. The bill builds on work supporting hospital financial sustainability and payment reform. The committee bill includes reference-based pricing and hospital global budgets. The bill will improve transparency and patient access to care. Past legislation called for improved access to investments in primary care, long-term care, and integration of medical and social services. S 126 also builds on much of that work. I began thinking about the potential for this bill last session. Work by the Green Mountain Care Board, the Agency of Human Services, the Healthcare Reform Oversight Committee, and others reinforced my understanding that we must take significant actions to change the course of healthcare costs and accessibility in our state. Without that, we stand to lose primary care providers, other members of our healthcare workforce, our community health centers. At least 4 of Vermont's smaller hospitals are in the red financially. Our larger hospitals are in better shape. Added to this economic reality is the concern about the financial jeopardy of Vermont's largest health insurer, Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Blue Cross and Blue Shield pays out 33.5% more than the average for Blue Cross and Blue Shield plans in the Northeast, and 42.7% higher than the national average. Our testimony indicates that higher private commercial insurance rates are directly related to hospital and healthcare system costs in Vermont. This and related testimony guided our decision-making as we developed S-126. Many of you are familiar with the significant work done during the summer and fall when the Green Mountain Care Board's Oliver Wyman report was developed and shared through a public process, including community outreach. That report caused grave upset and concerns by many hospitals, patients, and communities, and us. The Agency of Human Services is now working closely with hospitals and community-based services to assess regional needs related to healthcare, and positive outcomes are resulting from this transformation process. S-126 is a proposal from your Health and Welfare Committee responding to vocal complaints and concerns about high cost and sometimes inaccessible care. The bill responds to fears that Vermonters have about losing access to their doctor or to their local hospital. It is in response to Vermonters' rational concerns about high-cost health care, insurance premiums, and a desire for greater predictability. There are 3 main initiatives in the bill that begin to address high cost and gaps in Vermont's healthcare system. Initiative 1 is hospital budgeting and financial stability. Initiative 2 is a development of a state healthcare action plan that responds to changing community needs. Initiative 3 is medical record sharing to make healthcare clinical data more accessible to patients and providers and regulators. There's a lot in the bill, and it can appear to be complex because it is. I will explain each section when we walk through the proposal, and we will get there. The financial stability of our healthcare facilities, including hospitals, is front and center in the bill. The state has in the past and recently appropriated funding and other resources to help stabilize specific healthcare organizations. We cannot continue to bail out service providers. The imbalance among hospitals affects the financial sustainability of the entire system. Some hospitals are in jeopardy, while others seem immune to economic fragility. Because of the imbalance, it was difficult for your committee members to understand how to proceed. To that end, we took testimony from known experts as a basis for our decision-making. This is one important rule we have in our committee. We are data-informed using trusted resources. We also understand the need to align payment methodologies between Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial payers. The bill helps move toward this alignment. Finally, we have an understanding that what we do is not just complicated, it's more complicated than that. We worked with each of these thoughts as we completed our work on S-126. Before we go through the bill, I would ask that you look at the handout in front of you, and there are pages numbered. So beginning with, just to establish the economic baseline for understanding the effect that healthcare costs have in our economy. And the data that you have on the first 2 pages come from an expert that we heard from Yale, Zachary Cooper, and this is a work in progress, so this is not yet published information. And what I'm showing you today on the first 2 slides is just part of the information that he presented to us. So if you look and you'll just see a 1% increase in healthcare can have significant effects on the local economy. A reduction in per capita income, reduction in tax revenue, a reduction in jobs, and significantly no increase in employment in healthcare firms. On page 2, you can see that the result of a 1% increase in costs do not result in improved outcomes, health outcomes. So there's no equation there with cost and improved outcomes. In fact, in another section of the information that he provided to us, there's an indication that mortality increases as costs go up. And that can be explained in a number of ways, including medical debt that we recently looked at in this chamber. If you look at page 3, you can see, according to the Consumer Price Index, that the cost of hospitals is by far the highest compared with other significant costs that individuals may have. And then if you go to page 4, we can see what a tip of the iceberg of Vermont's healthcare affordability crisis. And this information that you're looking at comes from the Milbank Fund, who are also testified in our committee. We had them testify a couple of times. But what you can see here is that our affordability crisis, as we know, hospitals cost a great deal, and our Vermont hospitals cost more. These are for benchmark plans, our bronze plan in particular. We could put all of our benchmark plans here, and the price would be up to about $1,300 per capita, as compared with a lower rate in Maine or the United States or New Hampshire. So hospital costs are significant in our state, and they are driving concerns that you can see listed, the quotes on the left from folks who were involved in the public engagement process during last summer and fall with the Oliver Wyman Group. And we have heard these concerns previously with Act 27 of a couple of sessions ago. So there's a litany of concerns regarding these high costs. And it's not just the high costs affect us as individuals, but if you turn to the next page, 5, you can also see the effects of inflation. So we know that there are inflationary pressures that are on our providers. And the graph that you have in front of you, it's the darker colored one with a little green line that goes up. The green line is inflation. The lower 4 lines represent payment to, in this case, a physical therapist, an independent provider. And you can see that the income from those codes or those treatments do not reflect at all the inflationary costs that are incurred. So let's put this aside for a minute, please, and we'll turn to the bill. And I will go through the bill section by section with you and offer comments. And we will come back to the handouts in a minute for the purposes of looking at the components that are in the bill on reference-based pricing, global budgeting, and the plan itself. So the purpose of the bill continues to work toward integration, some of the strong goals that we've had in the past, improving healthcare outcomes, coordinating care, lowering costs, stabilizing care across the state. Obviously, when you've got hospitals that are in the red and hospitals that are not, that's a huge concern. We cannot lose our community-based services in our local hospitals. So those goals read throughout the bill, and we can find, if you look and think, you will find places in the bill that reflect each of those goals for this legislation. Section 2 of the bill establishes some new duties for the Green Mountain Care Board. And one of those is to add in reference-based pricing by 2027 for one or more hospitals in the state. So I'd like to digress for a second and talk about slide number 7 that you have on the handout. So you can look at reference-based pricing. Everyone has been talking about the fabulous opportunity with reference-based pricing. So here it is. We have it in legislation, and hopefully it will do something to help us. Well, what reference-based pricing means is, okay, let's think about how we pay for healthcare. We can pay for healthcare by paying for every service that we get. So it's called fee for service. We can do that. And we can set those fees based on any given service and continue to pay for any services that are offered. And what happens with fee for service is, could happen, is that you see people, providers giving more and more and more services to enhance their income. That became a problem with overutilization several years ago. Well, reference-based pricing is a way of connecting payment with Medicare. So it's a percentage of Medicare, and it can be applied in various ways, as you'll see on the slide in front of you. But the thing about reference-based pricing that I think is not well understood is that it can also be used in a fee-for-service world. So you can take that Medicare-derived payment and you can continue to have services and get paid the same thing over and over again. So does reference-based pricing solve the problem of fee-for-service? Not necessarily. So the way to do that is to put some guardrails around it. And so in our bill, we do put guardrails around how reference-based pricing is utilized, and that is through the work of the Green Mountain Care Board. So the Green Mountain Care Board will have duties in Section 2 to establish reference-based pricing, first for one hospital or more. And I know you're all thinking that the one hospital will probably be the University of Vermont, and that's probably the case. But before I go, I'd like to take a little sidestep, if you don't mind, just a deviation for a minute, and say, I think you all heard on the news today that the University of Vermont and the Health Network is working to help stabilize Blue Cross and Blue Shield, our largest insurer. And I would like to say that that is something remarkable. That's not what usually happens. So I think we all need to understand that that's a big step for the University of Vermont. And as my community hospital, I'm very thankful that they are doing that. So on Section 3, we look at payment amounts and methods for rate setting. So as we know, whenever we see high hospital costs, somebody's paying for that. We're paying for that through, perhaps if you have private insurance, commercial insurance, you're paying for that. So that payment to Vermont hospitals comes from our pockets. This section of the bill says that reference-based prices will be based on a percentage of Medicare rates for the same or a similar item or service. Reference-based pricing will start as soon as practicable, but not later than the hospital fiscal year 2027. The pricing will blend social, economic, and population-based needs in the service area, so they'll be responsive to where that hospital exists, what the economy is around the hospital, what the needs are around the hospital. There will not be what is known as balanced billing. So if you have reference-based pricing, let's think of this for a minute, that you're paying based on Medicare, a certain amount, and let's say that that amount is lower than what the Green Mountain Care Board puts in place, something lower than what you've been getting before. Let's suppose that the hospital has been getting 300% of Medicare. And then let's suppose that the Green Mountain Care Board says, now you're going to pay 200% or 250% of Medicare. So that what goes to the hospital from the commercial insurers will go down. Well, if you don't have a guardrail in place, the hospital will say, okay, for these services, we're going to charge 300%. and we're going to make up the money, or 350% to make up the money that you've taken from us. But that's called balanced billing, where you try to bill more to make up the difference. So in this bill, we are saying there shall be no balanced billing. So when we see a decrease in the amount paid to the hospitals from our insurers, we will see a decrease in the payment to our hospitals from insurers. It could be an increase. Some hospitals might see an increase. So it will be a decision at the board level to ensure sustainability, financial sustainability for our hospitals, for those in jeopardy and those who are not. That's the job of the Green Mountain Care Board. We don't do that in here, thank goodness, because it's not an easy job. The other part of Section 2 is that the Green Mountain Care Board and the Department of Financial Regulation will monitor implementation of reference-based pricing to ensure that decreased payments in hospitals result in decreased health insurance premiums. So if you have an expectation that patients are going to benefit, you want to make sure that patients benefit. So we want to link those decreases with decreased costs in insurance payments. Section 2 also has the Agency of Human Services consulting with the Green Mountain Care Board for reference-based pricing to determine how the agency might do that with services delivered outside of the hospital, like independent primary care folks. That was all part of Section 3. I think I said Section 2. I apologize for that. Section 4, now Section 4 moves into the responsibilities of hospitals when their budget is reviewed. So the Green Mountain Care Board does review hospital budgets. We've heard a great deal about that in the press. So this adds the information that hospitals must file with the Green Mountain Care Board for that budget review. And it includes things like the numbers of administrative employees. It includes information about the hospital's executive and clinical leadership. It includes proposals for the way that hospitals can support community-based and independent non-hospital providers. And that is very important in building continuity of care and integration of services. The real benefit here is that now hospitals will be submitting financial information that is useful to the board in making budget decisions. The board has a financial program that, you know, if every hospital comes in with different information, it takes a lot longer administratively to put it all together and makes it difficult both for the hospital and for the board. Continuing on Section 5, the hospital budget review that takes place with the Green Mountain Care Board, that when the budget is reviewed, then the Green Mountain Care Board will now have a statewide health care delivery plan. Once it's in place, we'll look at that and look at the total cost of care for that hospital within their area. The hospital, a hospital is part of a network, and we have one network in our hospital, part of a network in our state. The Green Mountain Care Board will now be able to review the network's financial operations as they relate to the individual Vermont hospital's budget. And then as part of one of the incentives we have here to increase primary care, increase mental health care, substance use disorder supports, is that the revenue from some of those services will be excluded when the hospital budget review is completed by the Green Mountain Care Board. The Green Mountain Care Board will also consider salaries for the hospital's executive and clinical leadership, look at variable and incentive plans, and compare leadership salaries for those of the hospital's lowest paid direct care employees. This has been an ongoing concern for some folks, and it's important, I think, to balance out our finances within the hospital. They'll also be able to consider the ratio of hospitals' administrative employees to its direct care employees. It requires that individual budgets established by the Green Mountain Care Board will be consistent with the statewide healthcare delivery plan that we'll talk about a little bit later. And once established, the reference-based prices established by the board will be reflected, the budget will reflect those reference-based prices. Included will also include meaningful variable payments and incentive plans for hospitals. So that would mean what is added, what is subtracted from the budget, and how can we make more efficient the budgetary process for the hospital. Also in Section 5 is a requirement that the Green Mountain Care Board establish global hospital budgets for one or more hospitals beginning in the hospital in the fiscal year 2028. So if you look at slide 8 that you have, that I handed out to you, you will see a description of, slide 8. What are hospital global budgets? And some states already have global budgets in place. Vermont has been looking at global budgets for a bit of time and is much more mature than we are. However, a global budget is essentially a set cap on the amount of money that the hospital receives. It could also include some variations in how that money is paid and applied. So it could be, reference-based pricing, it could be paid for, it can be paid in different ways. We won't go further than that at this point. One of the things that the Green Mountain Care Board will be able to do is to require hospitals, if a hospital needs to change its budget or reduce its expenditures in some way, and if the hospital decides that it will do that by taking out a service, removing a service, that the hospital will give at least 90 days in advance notice to the Green Mountain Care Board, Agency of Human Services, the Office of the Healthcare Advocate, and legislators who represent the hospital service area. So this is in response to some of the significant issues that we heard when the dialysis program was cut, when the mental health services were cut. And so now trying to get some forewarning and forearming so that the Green Mountain Care Board can then enact some regulatory response to that budget suggestion. The other thing that is in here that I think is quite important in this Section 5 is that any decrease in service will have to demonstrate a benefit to Vermonters. Section 6 looks at hospital networks. So this is the hospital network that we talk about with the University of Vermont being affiliated with, if it's affiliated with 50% or more of its operating network from Vermont hospitals with affiliated hospitals elsewhere, they will now be subject to some review and evaluation by the Green Mountain Care Board, including the structure of the hospital network, to determine whether any operations should occur at a hospital of the network, or whether the network itself provides value to Vermonters. And that's the biggest point. Does this network provide value to us in our state? The Section 6, also within the network piece, allows the Green Mountain Care Board to investigate financial operations of the hospital network, including compensation for its employees, executive leadership, in order to protect the public interest. authorizes the Green Mountain Care Board to recommend or take appropriate action as needed to correct any aspect of the network or its financial operations that are inconsistent with the principles for healthcare reform and our statewide healthcare delivery plan that we haven't talked about yet. When we took testimony here, we heard from an expert from the state of Massachusetts who was at one point, I forget where she was affiliated at one point, but anyway, very well-known person who, by the name of Nancy Kane. And she, our initial thought in putting this together was, should we have an audit, allow for an audit of the network? And her response was, all the data is available. You don't need to have an audit. We have all the information, and the Green Mountain Care Board will certainly have the information needed to make decisions about the network itself. And that does also could include governance structure of the network. Section 7 is a short little section that offers transparency and increases fairness through our system of contracting between healthcare providers and payers, and it allows for any contract that's written between, say, a hospital or a clinic or a provider, those contracts to be open to the Green Mountain Care Board and to the Department of Financial Regulation. Currently, these contracts are not open. They're little black boxes, and there are thousands of them, and we don't know what's included. We don't know how much money is in there. We don't know what the payment agreements are. And so what this will do will be open those up to scrutiny at request. So it's at request by the board or by the Department of Financial Regulation. For me, I think this is really very important and shines some light on things that are critical to cost concerns. All right, Section 8, we're getting there. So on Section 8 is actually on page, this is the plan. Go to page 6, and I'll get to that with you in just a sec. So this is the statewide healthcare delivery plan. So we have a lot of plans in our state, and we do, and hospitals have a lot of plans. The Department of Health has a lot of plans. Agency of Human Services has a lot of plans. And a lot of those plans are what I call shelf sitters. But this plan is not a shelf sitter. This plan is an action plan. It's a learning system. It's a rolling plan. So the plan itself will be developed through a stakeholder process, a group process. And the elements of the plan will include alignment of the principles of healthcare reform, and that will include Act 48 principles, principles to promote high quality, cost-effective healthcare services across Vermont, making each service available across the state. And I'll say that one is really important because we heard from our Agency of Human Services that transportation is a big deal where healthcare is concerned in certain geographic areas of our state. So this plan will consider all of those things. It will also consider financial annual growth rates, cost growth rates, total cost of care across Vermont's healthcare system, the balance of appropriate allocations of healthcare resources and services that balance quality, access, cost containment. So we'll build on data and information from existing sources, including ongoing initiatives and required analyses. So there will be an identification of the gaps and the barriers within our system, and to make recommendations for changes to those gaps within the system. So if you look at, so just one last thing on Section 8 here, and then I'll go to the little diagram that you have. When we started thinking about this plan, it's a Herculean effort. That's what it felt like. But the reality is, if you break it out into pieces and time, over time, between 2025 and 27, there'll be stakeholder engagement, data collection, analysis, public input. So you get everything together. And then in 28, the Agency of Human Services can prepare the plan, the initial plan. And by 29, January 15th, 2029, the Agency of Human Services can present this plan to the General Assembly for updating every 3 years. Well, if you look at then, really briefly look at there's an advisory committee that's put in place, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if you look at the little diagram on the left on page 6, you'll see that there is evaluation and planning, so that's the first step. Then there's some measurement that goes on, what we need to do, and then ultimately implementation in 2029. And that's a continuing process. Every 3 years, we come back with continuing process and suggestions. But looking at the advisory committee that we put in place, so wow, we don't need another advisory committee, but the reality is we do. And we have a model for this in the Rural Healthcare Task Force. Folks who have been out there looking at what is needed and what the gaps are within our rural state. So this advisory committee will establish affordability benchmarks, evaluate and monitor the performance of Vermont's healthcare system. They will do a lot of work, and they are very interested in doing this, the folks who we had in committee and who are looking at this process. It's kind of exciting to think that for the first time, we will be establishing cost benchmarks. We will be looking at what's needed in our local hospital service areas and what we need within our communities. It's not easy, but it will be important. And so if we know that a hospital has transformed itself to remove a service or reduce a service in an area, that this plan will include legitimate steps for providing transportation for folks to get to the service they need in another area or close by. That's the plan. Then Section 10 is a section that is important for the integration of healthcare data. Unified healthcare is called the Unified Healthcare Data Space, which we can just call it, putting clinical and claims data together, trying to bring folks together so that when you need your clinical information, it's easily accessible. When your provider needs it, it's accessible. When your payer needs it, it's accessible. Finally, there's one section, Section 11, gives the Green Mountain Care Board the authority to share information when requested, and that information is going to be kept confidential by another state agency. So if a state agency needs information, they can access it. Section 12 is a section, our ACO, our Accountable Care Organization, which we are not talking about today. The Accountable Care Organization is not going to be with us anymore. And so we're looking to see, is there anything salvageable from that program? In particular, is there healthcare data that we can use for quality analysis? And is there any money left over? Section 13, our Section 13, 14, and 15 and 16 are all some annual updates from the board or the Agency of Human Services regarding the work that they are doing within the bill. Before I go briefly to the appropriations section, let's go to the appropriations section because there's a lot of work in here, and the Green Mountain Care Board and the Agency of Human Services each are looking for resources to accomplish the work that's here. So Section 17 has Green Mountain Care Board positions for 2026. That would be the coming budget. And then some, we also have intent language to add other positions going forward for additional work in 27 and 28. Section 18, a request from the Agency of Human Services for limited service positions, for money for contracts and other work that they will be doing in the implementation of the bill. And then the effective dates are in the last section, 19. So one last thing to look at, and that is, if you look at slide 6, there are some things that are listed here that come from an article in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2024. And honestly, our committee did not see this until after we had already put our framework together. But look at the things that they're suggesting that we do. And each one of those things are things that you can identify within the bill. So we're prescient. Our committee really did look ahead to what was needed, and it was validated by the experts who came into our committee, and that's really rewarding when something like that happens. So finally, I would like to say the Committee on Health and Welfare worked immensely hard on this bill. We started working on it in January, and we now bring it to you at crossover. The goals here, I think, are substantial. The work is substantial. It's doable. And the reason it's doable is because we are in a crisis and we recognize the need for change. Change is difficult. University of Vermont is responding to a need for change. Our smaller hospitals are responding to a need for change through the transformation process in what we call Act 167. We all have changed as we look at this bill. We have all brought our thought into the process. We respect the work that's going on in our communities. And we just very much need to know that our healthcare system is balanced, is fair, is accessible, and is not overly costly. So these are some significant steps that we're taking. It's by no means the end of the world here. It's not the end of legislation, but it's critically important. Our committee voted 5-0-0 to bring you the bill. I will not read the 2 pages of testimony that we took, but it's a long list. And I will say, you know, hearing from people like Zach Cooper of Yale, or Nancy Kane of UMass, or Elliot Fisher of Dartmouth, or Chris Kohler of the Millback Memorial Fund, or other similar experts is pretty exciting to have in one bill. And that is what has helped us through all of this, in addition to all the other folks who we know in this building and outside of the building, our providers and others. So, Mr. President, I ask that the Senate support the bill and pass it favorably on for 3rd reading and then to the House. Thank you.
Senator from Chittenden, you get to continue with your report for the Committee on Appropriations.
So your Committee on Appropriations listened to my impassioned plea to leave the resources in, and I was voted down. No, we did vote 601, and we've struck sections 17 through 19, which are those sections containing appropriations. Having said that, there is an interest in looking at the resources needed going forward as the big bill is evaluated in our committee. The vote in committee, as I said, was 601. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. No. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as recommended by the Committee on Appropriations. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. And you've ordered third reading of S 126. We now have on the calendar for action H2. It was introduced on January 9th of 2025, and it was referred to the Committee on Judiciary, which reports it's considered the bill and recommends that it ought to pass in concurrence. Listen to the second reading of the bill.
H2, an act relating to increasing the minimum age for delinquency proceedings.
I recognize the senator from Franklin, Senator Norris, for the report of the Committee on Judiciary.
Thank you, Mr. President. My report will be somewhat shorter than the last one. H2, House Bill 2, addresses several issues related to the treatment of juveniles who commit offenses while they are young that would be criminal offenses if they were committed by adults. Sections 1 and 2 concern the age and range of children who can be subject to juvenile delinquency proceedings in the Family Division of the Superior Court. Under current law, a delinquency proceeding can be brought against a person who is at least 10 years old and not older than 18. If a person younger than 10 commits an unlawful act, the behavior might still be introduced in another type of proceeding, such as termination of parental rights, but it could not be used as a basis of a juvenile proceeding. The only exception to that in the juvenile proceeding could be brought against a child under the age of 10 for murder. H2 proposes to change the structure in two ways. First, the bill proposes to increase the minimum age so that a person would have to be at least 12 years in order to be subject to delinquency proceedings. This puts us in a line with many other states who have raised the age to 12. As a matter of fact, there's a few states who have gone above the age of 12. The effect of this change would be that delinquency proceedings cannot be brought against 10 and 11-year-olds. Section 2, H2 proposes to repeal the exception for murder, so the child under 12 could not be subject to delinquency proceedings for any offense. Although the maximum age to maintain juvenile proceedings is 18, current law permits the court to extend the court's jurisdiction for specified periods of time if the person who committed the offense at an older age. For example, if the person was 16 or 17 years of age while the offense was committed, the court can extend jurisdiction to 6 months beyond the person's 19th birthday. This permits the Department of Children and Families to supervise and treat the person for a longer period. Section 2 of the bill adds 1 year to this authority. So in case of the offense committed by a 16 or 17-year-old, the court can extend jurisdiction to 6 months beyond the person's 20th birthday. Sections 3 through 9 propose an additional 2-year extension until July 1 of 2027 on the implementation of Raise the Age initiative that Vermont has established for the past several years. Prior to this initiative, a young person who committed a non-Big 12 offense could only be charged as a juvenile in the Family Division if the youth committed the crime at age 17 or younger. Under the first step of Raise the Age initiative, which went into effect in 2020, this age limit was raised to 18 years of age or younger who committed the Big 12 offense where the case would start in Family Division. On the second step of Raise the Age, which is scheduled to go into effect on this year, April 1, 2025, anyone aged 19 or younger who commits excuse me, a non-Big 14 offense, and the Big 14 offenses were referred to as the Big 12 in years past. Last year we removed one, added 3, that's now the Big 14 offenses. Those, I'm not going to read all of them. This is arson causing death, assault and robbery with a dangerous weapon, murder, manslaughter, kidnapping, unlawful restraint, sexual assault, and so on.
So that's referred to as the Big 14. Because the number was increased by 2, we have the right to have their case begin in family division. The second step was originally scheduled to go into effect on July 1, 2022, but the legislature extended that date by 1 year to July 1st of 2023 as a result of the COVID emergency. 2 years ago, the legislature extended the date by another year to July 1st of 2024, and last year the legislature extended again to April 1st of this year. However, the committee heard testimony that various circumstances are still limiting DCF's ability to implement the Raise the Age program. As a result, sections 3 and 4 delete the April 1, 2025 implementation date, and sections 5 through 9 reenact the language changes necessary to permit 19-year-olds who commit non-Big 14 offenses to have their cases start in the family division. These changes become law on July 1, 2027 under the effective date provisions in Section 11. Section 10 requires the Agency of Human Services to provide the Joint Justice Oversight Committee, as well as several Senate and House committees, with 2 progress reports on the requirement that Raise the Age initiative be implemented on July 1, 2027. These are very similar to the bi-monthly reports that AAS provided last year, and they must describe the steps taken to achieve such specified goals as establishing a secure residential facility, expanding capacity for non-residential treatment programs, and to provide community-based services and expanded capacity for balance and restorative justice contracts, known as BARG. This year, a new provision was added to report requiring AHS to provide data on the Red Clover treatment facility, including the number of youth who use the facility, their length of stay, their treatment needs, and their racial and gender demographic data. Section 10 also makes clear that the failure by DCF to meet one of these progress reports can now be a basis for extending the implementation of Raise the Age beyond July 1 of 2027. Section 11 contains the effective dates. A particular important part is Section B, which has a March 31st, 2025 effective date for the sections that repeal Raise the Age provisions that are scheduled to go into effect on April 1 of this year. This is necessary to ensure that the provisions are repealed before they go into effect. We took testimony for DCF, along with many other agencies. DCF has made great strides in what they're doing with the Red Clover program, so long as there are vacancies, which at the beginning of this fiscal year, they had 28 vacancies. As of March of this year, they have 17. So they're making progress in reference to Red Clover and their vacancies. Another important part I want to mention is we took testimony also from the Defender General's office. And the Defender General's office, although in support of Raise the Age, stated they did not oppose H2. And the reasons for that was because they felt hitting that certain number versus allowing their clients to access those resources that are presently available, they felt was more appropriate than to lowering and having no services or resources to provide for their clients. So they don't oppose the bill, but they do support Raise the Age initiative. And I'm not sure of anybody who opposed Raising the Age initiative. From what I can gather, this seems to be a compromise between, as I was told from the House, between administration and the House in reference to, because of the lack of staffing and resources, and I guess there was a movement afoot to actually repeal Raise the Age, which floundered in the House. So this was their best version of a compromise. Now, you must remember that this is not repealing Raise the Age. This is only changing the implementation date. This is not repealing Raise the Age. So you must remember that. We took testimony. Our witnesses, I'm not going to read a whole lot of them, are Eric Fitzpatrick, Legislative Counsel, Tyler Allen, DCF, Matt Bernstein, Director of Office of Child and Youth Family Advocates, Lindy Bujo, DCF, Patricia Casanova, DCF, Lael Chester, Emerging Adult Program, Columbia University, Nick Duran, Family Services, Nick Goyle, Socialist Founder, Treat Youth Like Youth Coalition, Lauren Higby, Deputy Advocate, Marshall Paul, Defender General's Office, Jay Johnson, Governor's Counsel, Erica Radke, Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Children and Families, and Liz Ryan, former Chief of Juvenile Justice, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Programs. The vote came out of committee 3-2, and we asked for this Senate support. Thank you.
The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? so, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. And you've ordered third reading of H2. We have on the calendar for action S46, introduced on February 4th, 2025. It was referred to the Committee on Transportation, which reports it has considered the bill and recommends that the bill be amended as it appears on page 553 of today's calendar, and that when so amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill was then referred to the Committee on Finance, which reports that the bill ought to pass when amended as recommended by the Committee on Transportation. Listen to the second reading of the bill.
S46, an act relating to the taxation of vehicles used for forestry operations.
I recognize the senator from Grand Isle District, Senator Brennan, for the report of the Committee on Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will start off with a brief overview of S46. Starting off with 2017 and 2018, the General Assembly exempted specific logging equipment from the sales and use tax and the purchase and use tax. The tax exemptions were welcomed by the logging industry, but the General Assembly at that time chose not to exempt heavy-duty trucks, trailers, and repair parts from sales from the taxes. Logging and trucking contractors in Vermont are continuing to experience a decrease in the number of markets available to sell their products. This year, 3 long-established Vermont mills closed in the past 18 months. That's over a year, leaving loggers and truckers with the only option of hauling their products from Vermont landowners to mills further away from the site of the harvest, which resulted in a demonstrable increase in trucking costs regarding to the distance to the markets. In the past 4 years, loggers and truckers have experienced long and unpredictable periods of extremely wet weather and ground conditions in the summer, disastrous flooding, and winters without frozen ground conditions, leading to significantly reduced operability and income. It's important to note that business owners in this sector have not been eligible for any state or federal relief programs developed in response to the flooding. To ensure the ability to haul over long distances and to address the wear and tear of variable weather conditions, logging contractors have been forced to make significant investments in trucking infrastructure and repair parts. However, the heavy-duty trucks and repair parts that loggers and haulers have doubled in price in the past 10 years. Parts of that increase have been due to the cost of new technology to reduce emissions. New trucks, trailers, and repair parts are also subject to a 12% federal excise tax that has not been reduced or limited in any way as the price of trucks increase rapidly. Consequently, compounded logging contractors in Vermont are currently paying 18% tax. That's 12% federal, 6% state for all new trucks and repair parts. A state exemption will make it more affordable to invest in new trucks and trailers and will ultimately create environmental benefits. The exemption will also put Vermont logging contractors on the same level as loggers in New Hampshire and New York that supply forest products to the very same markets that Vermont's loggers and haulers currently provide. It's interesting to note that Maine also has legislation pending to provide the same exemption and cost relief as Vermont proposed. A little bit about the bill. There's 3 sections. In section 1, we amend the statutory section that provides exceptions to the purchase and use tax on motor vehicles to add additional exemptions for certain logging trucks and their repair parts. 32 VSA 8911, repair parts are added to the existing exemption for motor vehicles used for timber cutting, timber removal, and processing of timber. This exemption for repair parts applies when the parts are sold only as part of the value of the vehicle, such as replacement tires replacement chains, and winches. 32 VSA, a new exemption is added to this section, and it provides for 50% of the final imposed purchase and use tax on the following motor vehicles and their repair parts. These are used for timber cutting, timber removal, processing timber, and other solid wood forest products intended to be sold ultimately at retail and transportation of timber or equipment. This now includes semi-trailers, tractors, truck cranes, truck tractors, trailers, and motor trucks with a GVW of over 10,000 pounds. 32 VSA 8911, Section 23, the Department of Motor Vehicles may require a purchaser at the time to certify that the motor vehicle or other equipment is exempt under this section. 32 VSA 8911, Department of Motor Vehicles shall publish guidance relating to the application of this exemption. That's section 1. Section 2, add the definition of motor truck to the definition section of the purchase and use tax. And also it cross-references the definition for motor vehicle laws. And just to give you an example of what a motor truck definition is, it means any motor vehicle designated primarily for the transportation of property and shall be construed to include truck, tractor, semi-trailer, and truck, tractor, semi-trailer combinations. That is the gist of the bill. The effective dates of this bill are July 1st, 2025. The vote, we heard from a number of people, Commissioner Motor Vehicles, professional logging contractors of the Northeast, Kilburn Transport, Office of Legislative Counsel, Lincoln Farm Timber Harvesting, Joint Fiscal Office, and the sponsor of the bill, Senator White. The vote on this out of committee was 5-0-0. We ask for your support.
For the report of the Committee on Finance, Senator Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. For many of the same reasons outlined by my colleague from the senator from Grand Isle, your Senate Finance Committee did pass this bill out favorably just before the crossover deadline on Friday afternoon. At that time, we did not have access to legislative counsel, so we do have an amendment that's going to come right after this finance report as a floor amendment, simply adding a prospective repeal. We agree that this is absolutely worth doing, and the prospective repeal, also known as a sunset, just makes so 3 years from now, whoever's in this chamber has something to do. We want to keep them busy. So we're going to make sure that they look at this to make sure that this did what it was expected to do. And the JFO estimate that this could cost the Transportation Education Fund in total, possibly about $500,000 maximum in lost revenues. Maybe 3 years from now, we saw this enough uptake that we might want to reconsider it. So momentarily, you will be seeing a floor amendment proposed by me as well as members of the Senate Finance Committee to just put a prospective repeal on this this sales and use waiver of half of the current rate. Your Senate Finance Committee did hear from 4 individuals, I think similarly from the Senate Transportation Committee, and it was voted out 6-1-0. Thank you, Mr. President.
So the question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Transportation? I now recognize the senator from Chittenden, Senator Chittenden, for his amendment.
You'll all see in today's calendar, page 554, exactly what I just described, a prospective repeal language that would repeal this slight waiver of the half of the 3 years from now. It is a 3 year from now sunset. Your Senate Finance Committee members all signed on to this, and I would expect the Chair of Senate Transportation to maybe speak to this as well. Thank you, Mr. President. Or not.
The senator from Grand Isle is
Thank you, Mr. President. I just got promoted, I guess. Your Senate Transportation Committee reviewed this amendment and found it favorable on a vote, straw poll of 5-0-0.
So the question is, shall the recommendation of the Committee on Transportation be amended as moved by the senator from Chittenden and others? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the recommendation of amendment of the Committee on Transportation. And the next question is, shall the bill be amended as recommended by the Committee on Transportation as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as recommended by the Committee on Transportation as amended. Now the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of S46. Senator from Chittenden.
Mr. President, I would move that we pass over S65 to a date certain of April 1st, 2025.
The senator from Chittenden. The senator from Chittenden has moved that we postpone action to date certain April 1st, 2025 for S65. Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we will postpone action on S65 until April 1st, 2025. Senator from Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I would move that the Senate suspend its rules and put H2 through all remaining stages of passage.
Senator from Chittenden has moved that the Senate suspend its rules and put S2 through all remaining stages of passage. H2. It's close. Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we have put H through 2 through all remaining stages of passage. Okay. We now have third reading of H2, an act related to increasing minimum age for delinquency proceedings. Are there any amendments before third reading? Listen to the third reading of the bill.
H2, an act relating to increasing the minimum age for delinquency proceedings.
The question now is, shall the bill pass? Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we have passed H2. Nope, sorry. Whoa. Quick on the draw. How do I ungavel? Senator from Chittenden.
Mr. President, I would move that we suspend our rules and message the actions just taken on H2 to the House forthwith.
The senator from Chittenden has moved that we suspend our rules and message H2 to the House forthwith. Are you ready for the questions? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and we have suspended our rules to message our actions on H2 to the House forthwith. I believe we've now reached the end of the orders of the day. Senator from Chittenden.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I would move that the Senate pending announcements stand in adjournment until 1 p.m. Thursday, March 27th. And if I might lead off the announcements, immediately following, follow the gavel, the Rules Committee will meet just for a very brief consideration and vote, and I will explain that when we come together.
Are there any announcements? Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance will meet 10 minutes after the fall of the gavel, see what we can salvage of our agenda and at least vote out 127.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Appropriations will also meet at 3.
Senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Government Operations will meet immediately at the fall of the gavel.
Senator from Windham.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Institutions will meet at 3:15.
Senator from Bennington.
Mr. President, the Education Committee will meet at 3:10.
Senator from Windsor.
Anticipation. Thank you. Tonight's Farmers Night is a really wonderful opportunity for you to hear the Jaded Ravens. They are a terrific duo. Haley Jade and Kelly Raven. They perform all sorts of great music, but tonight they're focusing on sort of American country blues, and they have just come back from a nationwide tour, and we hope you'll join us. It should be a lovely reprise from our very busy days. Thank you. 7:30 in the House chamber.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, the senator from Chittenden has moved that we adjourn until 1 p.m. Thursday, March 27th, 2025. Are you ready for the question? If so, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and you've moved to adjourn until 1 p.m. Thursday, March 27th.